Hey everybody, today we are going to attempt to navigate the sometimes difficult book of Revelation. Let's dive in. Okay, fine, I'll be the one to do it. I'll sound the alarm. In all my years of ministry, I've seen so many Christians reading and interpreting the book of Revelation in a ton of crazy ways. And I guess I somewhat get it. You got dragons and trumpets and bowls, plagues and destruction. It's a lot to process. But what if I told you how we approach and go about reading the book of Revelation could be a major factor in why it confuses us and freaks us out so much? Or maybe you're not freaked out. Maybe you're like me 10 years ago. I understood that Revelation was a part of my Bible and I listened whenever my pastor would preach on it. But because it felt so inaccessible to me, I mostly just left it alone and just subscribed to whatever end-time theology my church had. Which, if you're like me, I wasn't taught a myriad of different end-time theologies to weigh. I was really just given one view to subscribe to. But whatever angle you're coming at the book of Revelation today, I just want to briefly share how I approach it and why I believe what I was taught when I was younger is completely false. So let's try a little experiment here. Let's all go to the kitchen and I'm going to give you a list of ingredients for something we're going to make. Cool, got your ingredients? Awesome. Now you have an hour and a half to make what these ingredients make. Go. Seriously, go. I'll wait. All done? Cool. Now if you're a pro, your final product should look like this. But if you're anything like me, you either have a huge mess in your kitchen right now, or you just gave up, called Publix, and you're sitting on your couch eating a donut. Now, I know this might seem like a silly experiment, but hear me out. We have to ask ourselves, why couldn't we make the cake the way it was in the picture? I gave you a very detailed list of all the ingredients you would need. Now you're probably thinking, dude, you didn't even tell us we were making a cake, you just gave us ingredients. Fair enough, you only had the ingredients. Now maybe you're actually an experienced baker and you knew that based on the ingredients we had, we were at least in cake territory. I don't know that I would have known that, but good for you if you knew. But without the proper recipe, I doubt any of us could have come up with the cake like it was in the picture. See, the image of the finished product along with a step-by-step recipe probably would have got us much closer to making the cake like it was in the picture. At least for you guys, I probably still couldn't have done it. Now, even with all those resources, people like me will probably never get it as good as it looks in the picture. But I could probably get it edible and at least decently tasting. You see, baking from a recipe is a lot like reverse engineering. We take the overall product, then we break it down into its simplest ingredients, apply a specific method, and then we put it all back together to get it like it was in the picture. But without knowing what the end product should look like and without any direction, all we're left with is ingredients. The Bible, and especially the book of Revelation, is the same exact way. Most Christians have probably heard about the dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, or the trumpets, or the bowls, or the plagues, destruction, so on and so on. Most Christians probably even get the concept that there's a lot of bad stuff happening in the book of Revelation, but at the end, Jesus and we win. But outside of that very basic concept, most Christians, when it comes to the book of Revelation, just have a list of ingredients or scriptures or ideas about the book. So just like when we were trying to make the cake out of all of these ingredients, a couple of things happen theologically. Either we get overwhelmed with all these ingredients and we just throw our hands up, or we attempt to put them together in whatever way makes the most sense to us, and hopefully we come out with something edible. But I can guarantee you, if we're all left to our own devices, everyone's cake will look different. That presents a huge problem theologically because now we're not all on the same page. So what I'm not going to do is take us into a deep dive into the book of Revelation right now, but I do want to give you a couple of key points that I think will help you better approach the book of Revelation. First off, The book of Revelation is not a book isolated unto itself. I know it can seem like that sometimes. You have the Old Testament with all the stories, then you have the prophets, you have some Psalms, some Proverbs, then we get to the New Testament, and you have the Gospels, you have the letters, and then boom, at the very end, it's Revelation, and it just seems like it's its own thing. And even though it feels like it's its own thing, we have to remember that nowhere in the Bible will we find scripture that's not informed by other scripture. Meaning that there are a ton of scriptures in the book of Revelation directly referencing other places in the Bible. So our first big problem is if we don't understand and identify these hyperlinks in the book of Revelation to other parts of scripture, we are in huge danger of misinterpreting what the book is trying to tell us. The second point is we have to put all scripture, not just the book of Revelation, through three main qualifiers. Let's just call them A, B, and C. A, we have to know who wrote the scripture. B, we have to know when this scripture was written because that's going to inform us of all the cultural significance during that time. And C, we have to know who the scripture was written to. This third one is especially important. A temptation that we as modern Christians constantly fall into is that we think scripture was written directly to us. And hold on if you've never heard this before, but it wasn't. Now, hear me out. All of scripture may be written for us, but it wasn't written specifically to us. Let's just use the book of Ephesians, for example. Those letters in Ephesians were not written to you and I in 2021. They were written to the church of Ephesus at the time the letters were written. Now, that doesn't mean we can't learn from those scriptures, but what it does mean is to better understand those scriptures, we have to first understand that it wasn't written to us. It was written to a people long ago with a completely different culture. A simple way to understand this is to ask yourself a very basic question. Would the church of Ephesus understand Paul's letter differently then than we as Christians understand it now 2,000 years later? And I think the obvious answer is most likely. So what that does is it challenges us as modern day Christians to then dig into the history, dig into their culture so that we can better understand who the scripture was written to, so we can better put it in context so that we can understand what the scriptures were actually trying to say. After all of that, I kind of have a big revelation to share with you. For the first time publicly in about 7 years after really digging into this material, regarding the book of Revelation and other end-time scriptures, I'm finally ready to announce that I